So a big part of what is happening at the financial markets, offering stocks, for example, and demanding stocks, is not focused and not linked with real economy, but is only the change from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next owner of this stock. And the consequence for the real economy is nearly is relatively low. There is a tendency that these financial markets, and this may be one with the stocks, that they develop in a way more and more disconnected from the real economy. So I painted here several of these financial markets. There are, for example, the bonds, the public bonds, and also bonds by private corporations, which have a fixed rate, but their price on the market changes nevertheless. And this is another part of the financial markets. Then there is a market of currencies. Currencies from other countries usually, or many people think they are needed to buy and pay goods and services in another country with another currency. And then one has to exchange, for example, euro and dollar. This is one part of the total. But meanwhile, it is said that 97% of the international transactions with currencies are not linked with real economic facts and transactions, but only with speculation. They speculate on changes in the exchange rate, and they may be very, very low, but because the money can be moved by computer system and worldwide net, then big amounts of money can be moved from here to there, from United States to Japan, from Japan to Europe, from Europe to China, and so on. And even very low changes in exchange rate are the object of speculation, and so a growing part of the money flow, meanwhile, is happening in this sphere, in this speculative sphere. Well, what is the problem? They should do this kind of transactions. A lot of what is happening there has a character of wagers. One assumes the exchange rate at that and that time will be so at that point, and the other assumes maybe higher, and then there will be made up a wager. It is like in a casino. So therefore, the expression, the word casino capitalism. If this is happening, if more and more of this money is flowing into the speculative sphere, the prices of the assets, for example of stocks, are not anymore really linked with what the corporation produces and has an expectation on profits. But it is the result of the overflow, of the flooding of the financial market. I will show it with this graph. There is some, this is the time here. There is some reason for the development of the prices of stocks in the expected profit of a company. But if now this is the price, and this is the quantity of offered and demanded stocks. Let's say this is demand and this is supply. Now this means supply. And this coming together of supply and demand leads to the actual price, if the price is development of price is liberated, is not controlled, is not by intervention. So this is the price on the basis, of the decisions of suppliers and demanders. If now, by this influence, or better exfluence, the money flows out and flows now into the financial market, the supply of money, the demand of stocks. The demand of stocks is developing into this direction. More and more demand for the stocks, and this means that the price of the stocks is going up. Not because the companies are producing in a better way with more expectations and profits, but only because overflooding of financial markets with liquidity, which is flowing out of this context here. To come back to this graph, here also is the price of the stocks. It leads to a development of prices which disconnect from the real economic basis, more and more into illusionary dimensions. And this can escalate because if several important investors go into this speculation and then the price really goes up, they draw maybe 100 times of their financial volume as wie eine Hammelherde. How is it called? The sheep. One is the Leithammel, one is the leading sheep, and hundreds of others follow the leader, the leading sheep. And such kind of pattern is happening at the financial markets. So it is also called the self-fulfilling prophecy. Many expect that the prices go up. Because they expect, they demand more and more of these stocks or several others. And as a consequence, the prices of the stocks at the stock markets, they go up. So their expectation is supported by what happens. And this is the reason why they feel, they were on the right way. And so it can escalate. But this is not possible on the long run. There is some tension building up. And this tension, again, has to discharge. And the discharge is the crash at the stock market or at the financial markets in general. We had this crash worldwide in 1929, the crash in Wall Street, New York, beginning of the bank crisis in the United States, beginning of the economic crisis in the United States, spreading over the international monetary system and the international trading links also to Europe, led in Europe to this mass unemployment in the early 30s. And this was the background for fascism. Without this economic crisis, fascism in Germany hadn't had any chance to come to power with the support of a big part of population and society. What we saw in 2008 was again a big financial crisis. You know where it started in the United States with the private households which had much too much credits, taken credits, and now were the debitors. Okay, usually there is a credit is linked, credit, with three aspects. This is interest, which has to be paid on the credit. This is the repay or redemption. I'll let it with re. And then, if this or that cannot be done by the debitor, then there is some kind of security. It seems a kind of security for the creditor or the bank, for example, says, okay, you can pay the credit and the debt, so we take the house which was financed with the credit, and you fall out of the house without a roof above your head and your body. And if it is land, then you lose the land under your feet. These are the consequences which threaten to debitors. And one can show that the interest system, with its tendency to ever-growing quantities of debts, debt, written debt, sounds the same. The debt is close to dead, more or less, for several parts of society. Because it tends to ever-growing debts and ever-growing interest burden. It has systematically and immanent to the system. It leads to more and more breakdowns of debitors. This is not their debt. They are not, in Germany we have the word Schuld. Schulden are debts, and Schuldner is the debitor, and Schuld is also guilty. The meaning of Schuld in German language is guilt. But the debitors who break down are not always individually guilty, but a big part of them is the consequence, big part of their breakdown is a consequence of the interest system. It needs more and more volume of debts, otherwise the monetary assets would not grow anymore. So where is the guilt? Not only, or if on the side of the debitors, but the deeper reasons, the deeper roots are anchored in the structure and dynamic of this interest system. So to come back to the securities. The securities should serve to those situations where the debitors are not able to pay the interest or to repay the credit, then the house is taken away. They lose their property. There is an inbuilt tendency in the interest system that more and more parts of society, and even of world society, even whole countries, lose their property, lose their control over the property to the creditors. And if they can't pay, and if the securities are very bad, and they have to become more and more bad, because securities, for example, land, houses and whatever, they cannot grow as it would be necessary by exponential growth of interest. The securities have to become more and more invalid. This is not only a fault, a mistake of the, let's say, the banks who gave the credits, but the system produces more and more invalidity of the so-called securities. And this is what happened in the United States. And it should have consequences in what the banks publish in their Bilanzen.
Report?
In their report, yeah. But they didn't dare to publish it, so they started to lie and to manipulate the figures. And okay, this can be done for a while, but the problem is not solved. Under the surface, below the surface, more and more stasis is building up. And then, it came up to the surface. Wow, what the banks hold as assets, or private shareholders held as assets, and had the illusion that it really was some kind of value. This showed to be nothing, sometimes nearly nothing, no value. And this is a problem which is not really overcome. There are so many assets where the creditors insist of being paid by the debitors, and if not, the banks, for example, they come from plus into minus, and it threatens that they will be go down in bankruptcy. And then we had the situation, they are too big to fail. Many of them are too big to fail, so they have to be gerettet.
Saved.
They have to be saved. Yeah, it is so incredible that now the words. I have difficulty to find the words, and especially in English. Okay, who could save the state? And now the states, many countries, they were much more in this public debt already. And they said, we don't have money available for social programs, for educational programs, for necessary things. No money, reducing public expenditures and so on. But in this situation, from one week to another, from one day to another, billions of dollars, and then also of euro in Europe, billions of dollars were available to protect those bankrupt, practically bankrupt banks. And this leads to another interesting question related to the monetary system. Where did these billions come from? They could not only come from here. There is another very important aspect here is, how is it called, where the water flows out here in the bathroom? Huh?
Faucet. Faucet.
Yeah. Bath set.
Faucet.
Faucet, okay. Everybody sees what I mean. And this is not water here, this is money. And this money has its source not only in the amount which already is in circulation and can flow from here to there and can flow outside of the real economy, but there's additional source of money, and one of the sources is the central bank. The central bank is the source of creation of new money. And if one starts to ask where does central bank have the money from, one comes more and more to the insight that the money is created out of nothing. Out of nothing. This is a privilege for a central bank. And if one in the next step hears that some of the most important central banks in history were not public, not state banks, but private banks, starting with the Bank of England in 1694, and continuing until the Federal Reserve System in the United States, founded at 1913. Both very important, very powerful central banks who have a big influence by influencing the monetary circulation, by creating money out of nothing and bringing it into circulation, most of the time by combining it with an interest from birth on, from the beginning on. This privilege is in private hands, sometimes masked as the Federal Reserve System. At the first glance one has the impression it's a state institution, federal, sounds already like this. But it is only some kind of facade. The owners, the real owners of the columns of this building of Federal Reserve System are big private banks and is a financial or oligarchy. Yeah, and this source is here and is able to create additional money out of nothing in order to flood the financial markets. This money must not flow here in the real economy. It flows into the financial markets and overflows the financial markets and leads to this. And those who know about the big tendencies, they will be wise enough to go into these transactions, for example at this level, and go out of this short before it goes down. And the hundreds who have followed, they will fall into the Abgrund. Okay, they will fall deep down. But it's not only the central banks with this privilege, which is amazing enough and dramatic enough, if they are private. It is also, and much more important even, the commercial banking system. I cannot develop this in this limited time today. But it can be worked out. It can be shown that the commercial banks are able to create money out of nothing, additionally to the central bank money. Upsala. So there is central bank money, and there is on this basis a multitude of money created by the commercial banks, by the so-called deposits. Deposits can be used for transfer from one account to another without cash. And by this kind of transactions, it is possible on the basis of one real deposit. One pays €1,000 to the bank in cash and gets on one's account a figure. And one can use this figure for transactions, cashless, or one can take these figures and take cash again from the bank. This is very roughly only indicated. The basis, because not everybody takes it as cash out of the money, only 10%, for example. This makes it possible for the banks, for the commercial banks, to add to the central bank money an additional kind of money in this, with these so-called deposits. And there's a lot of confusion because something is called deposits where no real deposition has taken place. It is only putting in a computer a number on the account of a debitor. And this doesn't change the fact that the commercial banks are the creators of a big part, of a big percentage of what we had here as demand for social product or demand for financial assets. They created, again, out of nothing, bring it into circulation and take interest from the debitors. This is a good privilege. And if the debitors are not anymore able to pay the debt and to make debt service, then their property is taken away. So in total, one can say, with money which is created out of nothing, those banks, central banks, but additionally commercial banks, are in a privilege and in a position where they can take away property of growing parts of society. One can say they have means to plunder big parts of the world. And this is some kind of genius to invent such a kind of money creation, a monetary system. Because on the other edge, there are suffering not only individual debitors who have broken down, but whole countries, whole parts of the world, big parts of society in, let's say, third world countries, for example. They suffer under the consequences of this interest burden, and if they are not able to pay it, then the creditors or their international institutions like IMF and others, they say if you can pay, then we take control over your resources, over your population, over your policy. And this leads more and more from democracy, where it may have been existed, into dictatorship, where the dictatorship is functioning from behind the curtain, because this system, this financial system, is not transparent for most of the people. From behind the curtain, there is an immense control over big parts of world society. And I think that this doesn't fit to the democratic goals and Also, it doesn't fit to scientific goals. It has to become more and more transparent, more and more from behind the curtain, in front of the curtain, on the stage of public discussion. So, what can be changed? Let's add at first here the second source. Are the commercial banks, what I just mentioned. What are the consequences, or should be the consequences, of these insights if they are correct? And if they are correct, can only be discussed in discussion, but not in closing the eyes. Celio Gesell said, here's the problem. Here it should be solved. If this would be a system of central heating, where the rooms are warmed up in winter, and if in winter the room would become more and more cold, then one would look, where is the reason? There is the hot water running out, flowing out of the system. There is a hole, a leak, how is it called? A hole, yeah? There is a damage at the system. We have to repair it at that point where the problem is. Yeah, but usually in this context, one doesn't look here. Instead, for example, Keynes, he had recognized that there may be some exflow of money with this liquidity preference. But the solution, he didn't seek the solution at that point. Instead, he said, there must be more demand to compensate what's flowing up here. And the demand can only come into the circulation by the state. And the state has to give the stimulus, which I already told about. And I already indicated and mentioned that this, on the long run, will produce side effects of very big problems. Inflation and more interest burden for the state, where the state and its services breaks down more and more. With social crisis, with political crisis, and so on. So this is not really the solution, what Keynes offered. Gesell, 20 years before Keynes, in his work, The Natural Economic Order, Natürliche Wirtschaftsordnung, which was published first time 1916, he said the problem has to be solved at that point where it is, at the roots of the problem. And he proposed to introduce some element in the monetary system at this point here, where money is flowing out of this circulation in real economy. This should be charged. There should be installed some kind of charge for money which is drawn out of real circulation. In German, it is called Umlaufsicherungsgebühr, a charge to guarantee the circulation of money. And this should be a specific percentage, high enough to make it unattractive to draw the money out of the real economy. Instead, the money, to avoid this to avoid this charge, the money would flow more and more into the real economy, and only by this the supply of money will grow, and taking a given demand for money and credit, then the interest rate will will go down, and a diminishing of interest rate will then also diminish all these 5 crisis tendencies which I spoke of, and where I only showed one tendency. The others I couldn't really develop, only indicate. So if these crisis tendencies would be diminished, it could start some kind of healing process of some kind of social organism. And I compare it meanwhile with a similar methodological way in alternative medicine, in acupuncture. There's a flow of quite different means or medium. It is a flow of life energy through the body. And this also may be blocked in its circulation, and then it disturbs the organism, and the organism becomes ill in one or another aspect. And if the exact points are found out where this disturbed energy flow could be regulated and come back to its original natural flow, then the rest is done by this flowing energy by itself. Some kind of self-healing quality is induced, or is, with the acupuncture needle at the exact point. And amazing results sometimes happen. So I compare it with a social organism of an economy. The disturbance of the continuous flow of money in the real economy, the split of money between real economy and speculative financial markets, there is a fundamental disturbance in the root of the system. When this is recognized, then one can find out those points where it has to be intervened with some change. This would be really an important change. And to induce, again, a continuous flow of money in the real economy, in its function as a means of exchange and buying, which is an important aspect of money. But to reduce more and more the split off. I bring another graph. Here's money. If it flows in the real economy, this is a positive aspect. If it is split off, like here, and then more and more away from real economic basis, then it turns into negative, into the opposition. The money in our monetary system has fundamentally a split between money as a means of exchange and money as a means of speculation. And as long as this split is existing, it produces again and again big crises. So what to do? This split off has to be changed, has to be overcome. And then there is money which functions in this context, and this should be more and more reduced. So this is one means